Worst legal day the Trump presidency has had so far. And because the Russia probe now has a cooperating witness close to the president, could be the first of more rough days. Tonight, we have covered what Mike Flynn admitted and how Bob Mueller can use it and who else has criminal exposure. But now we turn to a special legal report on what this story is actually at its root fundamentally about. Not just the laws allegedly broken along the way, but the conduct, the statecraft, the actual effort, now today increasingly exposed, by Trump officials to do something that still sounds reckless for security and actually counterproductive politically. Their effort to appease Russia at the very moment the U.S. was punishing it for its election meddling. So let's walk through it. It was December 2016 when the news broke that the U.S. was sanctioning Russia for election meddling.
Breaking news at this hour, new U.S. action against Russia over allegations of hacking. The Obama administration takes broad action to expel nearly 36 Russian diplomats from the United States and enact sanctions on some of the senior-most members of Russian intelligence.
That was the news, big news. And it was that very same day, December 29th, 2016, that Mike Flynn sprang into action. We can report tonight that he was talking to a senior Trump official about how to appease the Kremlin, and then Flynn got on the phone with the Russian ambassador to discuss undercutting the sanctions, asking not to escalate the situation. Flynn admits to that today. So as the U.S. government sanctions Russia, Flynn pleading for Putin to lay low, and he did. And President-elect Trump then praises Putin in a tweet which was viewed as bizarre at the time. But there was no public evidence showing why Trump aides were so eager to undercut people and jobs they were going to take over by January 20th. On January 12th, though, the Washington Post then reported that Flynn had phoned Ambassador Sergei Kislyak several times and that Trump aides denied the sanctions were discussed on those calls. Now, if that was just an innocent sanctions discussion, why deny it? Why dispatch the most senior officials to insist that Flynn did not plot with the Russian ambassador to undercut sanctions?
What I can confirm, having spoken to him about it, is that those conversations that happened to occur around the time that the United States took action to expel diplomats had nothing whatsoever to do with those sanctions.
Nothing whatsoever. That was not true. Mike Flynn said so today. Was Pence lying? Well, Mike Flynn knows, and today he says he'll be cooperating fully. The reason he's cooperating is that just 4 days into the Trump administration, the FBI asked about the sanctions, and Flynn falsely stated he didn't ask the Russians about the sanctions. Now let's pause. It would be reasonable at this point to wonder, if Flynn lied about this then, why believe him now? But there's an answer. And it's that Mueller has evidence about what really happened, including intel revealing what was discussed. Mueller's not alone either. It was the acting attorney general, Sally Yates, who also had the evidence showing that they did discuss sanctions, which alarmed her so much, she marched over to the White House warning Flynn lied and the Russians knew it.
That the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
That's bad. But as the old honey badger saying goes, White House don't care. They kept Flynn on the job, and instead of pressing Flynn on what he did, Trump pressed the FBI for scrutinizing Flynn. Just think about that. The crime that Flynn confessed to today is the impetus for Donald Trump asking the FBI to leave Flynn alone. It was the next day, after Yates warned the White House, that Trump suddenly invites the FBI director to dinner asking for a loyalty pledge.
And that the dinner was an effort to build a relationship, in fact, he asked specifically, of loyalty in the context of asking me to stay.
You're not supposed to ask the FBI for personal loyalty, and it looks worse if you ask right after learning your top aide is compromised. Then when Trump was pressed about these very public accounts of Flynn's sanctioned lies, which had been on TV for roughly like a week, he goes on Air Force One and tells reporters he hadn't seen the story.
What do you make of reports that General Flynn had conversations with the Russians about sanctions before you were sworn in?
I don't know about it. I haven't seen it.
Haven't seen it. Don't know about it. 3 days later, Flynn was out.
This morning, National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has resigned his post.
Flynn gone, but not forgotten, because then Trump started pressing Jim Comey to drop any Russia inquiry on Flynn.
Flynn had been forced to resign the day before. On the 14th, the president makes specific reference to that. And so that's why I understood him to be saying that what he wanted me to do was drop any investigation connected to Flynn's account of his conversations with the Russians.
At the time, that was also secret, so we only know about it because Trump later fired Jim Comey over Russia, and then we heard that testimony there. In public, Trump was spinning this defense in February.
Mike Flynn is a fine person, and I asked for his resignation. When I looked at the information, I said, I don't think he did anything wrong. If anything, he did something right. You know, he was just doing his job. The thing is, he didn't tell our vice president properly.
It was all about the vice president. Then Trump went on and made a more public, specific denial, which Mueller's now probing. Trump saying he did not direct Flynn to make those Russia sanctions calls.
Did you direct Mike Flynn to discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador
No, I didn't.
prior to your inauguration?
No, I didn't.
And
Mike,
would you have fired him if the information hadn't leaked out?
No, I fired him because of what he said to Mike Pence. Very simple.
But today's Mueller docs basically say Flynn did get direction from senior Trump officials at Mar-a-Lago in December. Translation? People with the president, and more than one of them. Now, those people aren't technically named in the document, but we have begun reporting on some of them, and Flynn has pledged to tell Mueller all the names. And then those people will be interviewed. The fact that Flynn knew so much looks relevant to Trump's ongoing interest in Flynn. He was still defending him in May.
This man has served for many years. He's a general. He's, in my opinion, a very good person.
And that may be true. Mike Flynn is now flipped, which means it's Mueller and Trump's critics that are going to be invoking his veracity and his service as a witness. And Trump will have to decide if he agrees with all of this praise he publicly gave his once loyal aide. But the most ominous part of Flynn's criminal statement today is this, a piece of pretty standard language at the top. Quote, these facts do not constitute all of the facts known to the parties about this crime. Think about that. Bob Mueller doesn't need to tip his hand on all the other facts, and the law doesn't usually work that way. But there's a story in these documents, and it shows an effort on the part of the Trump campaign and the early Trump administration to appease Russia. It suggests this was an urgent priority with top aides involved, with a flurry of calls and coordination before they even took office. So when you move beyond what happened today with the lie and the false statement, you have to say why. Does this look like policy as usual, or were there other interests at play? Was there something desired, or was there something owed? Now, Flynn had taken money from Russian interests and huddled with Vladimir Putin, and Trump had advocated warmer Russia relations.
I believe an easing of tensions and improved relations with Russia from a position of strength only is possible, absolutely possible. Some say the Russians won't be reasonable. I intend to find out.
And now apply what we've learned, what Mike Flynn admitted today, what is not in dispute in America tonight, to Donald Trump's infamous request during the campaign to Russia to help him steal Hillary Clinton's email.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Bob Mueller has a lot on Flynn right now, and Flynn says he's got info on other people. And the question here is what's not in today's documents? What are those other facts? That's a question of whether anything between Donald Trump and Russia in 2016 could have been driving this now documented flurry of outreach to Russia, which now involves at least one crime on the record and admitted, lying, and potential other crimes about Mike Flynn being a foreign agent, and the clear suggestion in a cooperation agreement that, yes, there are more crimes yet to be charged. history with Vladimir Putin on the line, like this controversial 2015 paid speaking event, and it all looks a little different right now. Journalist Michael Isikoff was shining a light on that incident long before Bob Mueller came along.
Were you paid for that event?
You'd have to ask the folks that went over there to
well, I'm asking you. You'd know if you were paid.
Yeah, I mean, I went over there as a speaking event. It was a speaking event.
And
what difference does that make?
Well, I mean,
somebody go, oh, he's paid by the Russians.
Well, Donald Trump has made a lot of the fact that Hillary Clinton has taken money from Wall Street.
Yeah, I didn't take any money from Russia, if that's what you're asking me.
What difference does it make? Well, we can report the Russians did send $45,000 by RT to Flynn. There is a pay stub and everything. Joining me now is the man leading that reporting, who was in the courtroom today, Yahoo's chief investigative correspondent, Michael Isikoff. Michael, when you look at what is documented and alleged here, does it look like typical foreign policy activity or something worse?
Well, it's certainly not typical foreign policy activity. What's extraordinary about the charges that were laid out today is that, you know, this is during a transition, and Flynn is admitting he lied about efforts he was making to essentially undermine what the then president, Barack Obama, was trying to do on the foreign policy front, not just on Russia, but also on the question of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the Security Council resolution. And if you read the court papers closely, he was doing it at the direction of senior officials in the Trump transition. We know one of them, in the case of the Israeli settlements question, was Jared Kushner. We are not.
And so, Michael,
they have not publicly identified who the other one was.
Here's the question:
yeah.
Is that
right.
just tacky and sloppy and relatively unprecedented, or is it something worse?
Well, look, you mentioned before the Logan Act, and it is a statute on the books since the John Adams administration. Nobody has ever been successfully criminally prosecuted under that law. So, you know, whether or not Michael Flynn could have been prosecuted for violations of the Logan Act is extremely problematic. But certainly we know it raised a lot of questions among officials at within the Obama administration saying, what are they doing? They're not in office yet. They're contacting foreign governments and telling them to go against what we're trying to do on the foreign policy front and at the United Nations. And that's not something you see every day of the week or every 4 years when
certainly not. Michael Isikoff, who, as I mentioned, has been all over this story from the start. Thank you for being part of our special coverage. The Flynn guilty plea is crucial because it puts Mueller at the heart of Trump's inner circle, which leads to a big question: who is next?
This admission of guilt by the former national security advisor is a shattering moment for the Trump presidency. For the first time, the special counsel is penetrating the White House gates.
Today is an historic day in the Trump presidency because it is perhaps the beginning of the end.
I think the American people and a lot of us asked, why is he so desperate to have this investigation stopped, particularly as we see more and more people either plead guilty or come forward under indictment.
I'm joined now by two people who know these issues well. Ned Price was on Obama's National Security Council as a director and advisor, former CIA official, I believe, as well. Bill Kristol from the Weekly Standard, among other things. I'm not listing all your titles, gentlemen, to save time. Bill, we're 30 minutes into this broadcast. I've been covering this all day, as I'm sure you have. I'm going to ask you a question I haven't asked anybody yet tonight. Does what you learned today give you a view that collusion and conspiracy between Trump officials and Russia more likely occurred during the 2016 campaign?
Yes, and it gives me the view that Mueller now has access to everything Flynn knows and participated in from the campaign, from the period between the campaign and when they went into the White House, from the transition, and then from the White House. And one fact I don't think it just occurred to me as I was listening to the show earlier. When does the FBI interviews Flynn, 4 days into the administration, right? January 24th, I think Tuesday or Wednesday of that first week. Flynn, Friday night of that week, the president has Jim Comey, the head of the FBI, over for an extremely unusual one-on-one dinner. Doesn't that suggest that Flynn went told Trump, I mean, so we assume he would have, hey, I had an FBI interview. They're really looking at this stuff. Trump's immediate reaction, call Comey over. And what did he say to Comey that we know from Comey's testimony? Let up on Flynn. Trump has always been focused on Flynn as the sort of, I don't know, the weak link, the key link that could cause him damage, right? Trump didn't ever say, to our knowledge, to let up on Manafort, let up on Jared.
No.
You know, it's always, so I think that I just come back to the centrality of Flynn, and it may not be that December meeting that's central. You can get a plea deal, you know, for whatever reason you want on anything, honestly. And it's sometimes you actually don't want to reveal what your most central line of investigation is to the other defendants.
Sure.
So you get a plea deal on something, and then you've got Flynn. He's required now to testify truthfully to the FBI and to Mueller's people on everything, on whatever they ask him. And this notion you sometimes hear, I'll just start one more point. You know, you sometimes hear on some of the TV stuff, and well, how much will Flynn now give him? He doesn't have that choice. He has to answer every question truthfully, right?
No, I mean, that's...
So they can be about 2016, it can be about 2017, it can be about Comey, it can be about the meeting in Trump Tower in June. I think that's why this is such a big moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, the deal is done. I mean, this is why we go back to the deal. The deal's right here in U.S. v. Mike Flynn. This was signed yesterday, and it's done. And it's a deal that, as you allude to, Bill Kristol, it says he will cooperate fully, truthfully, completely. He will immediately turn over all evidence of crimes he knows about, whether he was involved in them or not, unless there is some late-stage intervention through the lawful commander-in-chief, powers to do something about a pardon, which we're not there, we're not reporting that. But barring some other extra legal intervention, this is the deal. And so, Ned Price, I want you to speak to the same question that Bill Kristol answered, and I think Bill spoke about it at the line between evidence and inference. The evidence is bad because you have this obsession with Flynn and the pressure on Comey. The inference is that Bill raises the question of, was that a direct result of Flynn going to the president and saying they're on to us, or the deep state is messing with us, or we've got to get the FBI off our back. So speak to that and to the question I put to Bill Kristol. Does this evidence today make you think collusion was more likely?
Well, Ari, I don't think we know anything from today's actions about the question of collusion. What we do know, that what was released today, is that Bob Mueller has his tentacles into Michael Flynn. And what we learned is something especially interesting, that Michael Flynn claims that he was just following orders. And of course, that raises the question, well, who was giving these orders? Who exactly? Who was calling the shots? Was it Jared Kushner? Certainly all roads seem to lead to Jared. He seems to be the senior transition official mentioned in the charging document today. But how high does this go? Does this go above Jared Kushner even? We know that you don't make a plea deal with a big fish unless you think that fish can help you net an even larger fish. And so the question in my mind is, does this go all the way to President Donald Trump? And I think there is some circumstantial evidence gleaned from today's document that suggests as much. With the outreach to the Russians when it came to Russian sanctions, the day after the Obama administration mounted these sanctions and other punitive measures, President Trump tweeted that Vladimir Putin was very smart and very wise not to retaliate. He said, in fact, that he always knew Putin was a very smart guy. When it came to the Israeli settlements, President Trump held a call with Egyptian President al-Sisi, after which it was claimed that the Egyptian president decided to postpone that UN vote. So there, at the very least... Why do you
think that Mideast stuff was in there? My view, looking at it legally, is Mueller did not need to include it. He had enough. But as you allude to, and it's something we spent less time in this hour on, it's in there. Why?
Well, I think it's in there for a couple of reasons. One is it allows Mueller to get his tentacles into Flynn with potentially the Logan Act, although I would agree with what your guests have said about the viability of criminal charges under the Logan Act, but it provides some leverage. But two, I think there is a case that it does lead back to President Trump, because President Trump was very much involved in the same lobbying effort that Jared Kushner, as the senior transition official, was involved in. President Trump himself spoke to the Egyptian president about this very issue and actually had a concrete impact in that the vote was delayed because President Trump intervened.
Right.
And so clearly I think that shows another connection to President Trump and ties this back to him potentially as at least one of the people who was providing orders to Michael Flynn.
Right. And with a lot of roads, as you say, leading to Kushner, we're going to fit in a break. I will note, on the other hand, as Bill Kristol knows, as a student of global geopolitics, that Jared Kushner did achieve Middle Eastern peace. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention. I know the media can be unfair sometimes, but that was a breakthrough. I'm just kidding. That didn't happen. It was something they're working on, though. Ned, thank you for joining. Bill, we'll be right back with you. After the break, why was Michael Flynn so eager to do Russia's bidding? This is our special report tonight. We've been working on it all day. Also later, the fear and uncertainty inside the Trump White House tonight. Some political details that are fascinating. My politics panel breaks it down later.
You're watching MSNBC International.
Investigation to begin with, and that's the backdrop for Jim Comey's account of Trump's interest in Flynn.
This is the president speaking. I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go. Now, those are his exact words. Is that correct?
Correct. And the reason I keep saying his words is I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the president of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it. I remember saying, I agree he's a good guy, as a way of saying I'm not agreeing with what you just asked me to do.
That would have been door number one, which Jim Comey at least didn't agree to let Flynn go. Then there would be door number two, where we are today, cooperating. That is what Flynn's doing. And now he's required to turn over all evidence of crimes relevant to the case and to testify fully, completely, and truthfully. But testify about what and about who? For more on that, I bring in a criminal defense attorney, Brian Weiss, and back with me, former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance. Brian, what could Bob Mueller get from Flynn?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, Ari. What he can get for the first time, is all of your guests have succinctly said, is a view inside the Oval Office, a view on board Air Force One. Look, Bob Mueller made his bones prosecuting mob cases when the president was seducing Marla Maples. He recognizes that you build a case like this from the ground up, not from the top down. What he can get from Mike Flynn from the first time, he's got one of the capos. We're not talking about a chucklehead like George Papadopoulos. We're talking about somebody who was a key player, a non-family member. And remember, all of the talk about the C-word collusion, the important C-word that should be on the minds of people in the White House today, Ari, is conspiracy. What it is that Mike Flynn can tell them about the other players in this ongoing legal drama about Russia.
And Brian, just generally, if you do flip, does it work if you tell on people who work for you, or you tell on your assistant, or who do you have to tell on?
Generally, the rule of thumb from anybody who's ever seen the Godfather trilogy is that you have to trade up. I mean, you know, Frankie Five Angels didn't give them anybody below him. He gave them Michael. So in this situation, it's critical for Mike Flynn to be able to advance the story beyond that which Bob Mueller already knows. And that ought to be the scary part for everybody who works in the White House. They don't know what Bob Mueller knows.
And to that point, Joyce, the theory of the case is either that Mike Flynn outsmarted Bob Mueller and got a sweet deal and isn't giving much up, or that Bob Mueller outsmarted Mike Flynn and is getting a lot in this deal. What's your bet?
You know, plea agreements are a lot like business deals. Depending on how much you value something, you may be willing to pay a bigger price for it. And to prosecutors, paying a big price means offering someone fewer charges and a lighter sentence. If you look at this plea agreement that way, Bob Mueller obviously thinks that Mike Flynn brings a lot of value to his case. And so I'd say that the prosecution here is getting a good deal. They're getting a good bargain. They obviously believe that this is yet another rung on the ladder moving up to whatever their ultimate goal might be.
And then also, Brian, take a look at what Senator Dianne Feinstein was saying today, and she's very careful on these issues. But she said this shows a Trump associate negotiating with Russians against U.S. policy before Trump was in office and after announcement that Russia has interfered, a stunning revelation. It could be a violation of the Logan Act. I want folks to understand that is a very serious law, but one that's rarely prosecuted. The Logan Act is basically a traditional rule that private citizens can't just go and negotiate with foreign powers to undermine what the U.S. is up to. I think most citizens wouldn't think of doing that in the first place. Brian, if you're in there defending a client and they're got exposure for something that's that extreme but also that rarely prosecuted, what does that mean?
Well, I think what it means is that you've got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And Robert Kellner, Mike Flynn's lawyer, in my estimation, did an extraordinary job. I think that this was a trade that helped both ball clubs because there was somebody, Ari, who didn't get indicted. There was somebody who didn't appear in federal court, right, and that's Mike Jr. I really think that that was part and parcel of Mike Flynn's decision to take door number 2.
Well, and you put it well, and it's easy to forget. It may be very good lawyering on the Flynn side that he got to this place. And if it is good lawyering, that means he could have been in a much worse place, with much more criminal exposure. That's one of the other headlines here embedded in this very big day. Brian Weiss and Joyce Vance, thank you so much. Up next, we're going inside Michael Flynn's connections to the Kremlin, his work with a key Russian propaganda arm. In fact, I'm very excited to tell you I have the investigative reporter here who led the way on this story.
Were you paid for that event?
You'd have to ask the folks that went over there to
well, I'm asking you. You'd know if you were paid.
I'm asking you. And later, we dig into the motive. Why did Mike Flynn and other senior officials in Trump's orbit want to appease Russia?
Mr. Melber, it's all yours.
It's a big night. Thank you, Chuck Todd. This is December 1st. December 1st, 2017, you can mark it down. This is the day that everything changed in the Russia probe. This is the first time a former White House official has pled guilty to a Russia-related crime. Former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn admits he lied to the FBI about Russia, and he will cooperate. This bombshell coming on day 315 of the Trump presidency. Now, tonight, for special coverage on The Beat, we have a panel of experts. They're going to join me in a moment. But first, what just happened? Consider that while much is in dispute in this Russia probe, the news we have for you tonight, which I'm about to break down, is material that's not in dispute at all, because the days of Mike Flynn and Bob Mueller fighting are over. Mike Flynn and Bob Mueller right now agree on what Mike Flynn did wrong, and tonight they begin collaborating on the same goal, Flynn signing a cooperation agreement to help Bob Mueller solve crimes. So we begin tonight with a few facts that Mike Flynn admitted today. Everything I'm about to report has been admitted to and signed by Mike Flynn. Point number 1, Flynn lied about Russia contacts. He lied about all of his dealings on Russia, the core of the substance of what he was doing in the transition. He lied about it to the FBI. Number 2, Flynn lied about sanctions on Russia. He lied to the FBI about the Trump transition team's plot to coordinate with Russian officials and to undermine those new sanctions that Obama had put in place against Putin. So at the very moment that the Obama administration was punishing Russia for election meddling, Mike Flynn was trying to undercut those sanctions and then hide that plot from the FBI. And third, I can tell you, the fact here tonight, Flynn did not act alone. The nation is processing a remarkable story right now at the end of this week. It is a story that Bob Mueller got Mike Flynn to tell, and it's a story that Flynn didn't act alone. Now, that might be good news for Flynn as a cooperating witness, and it might be bad news for other people. I can tell you these documents note that he worked with a, quote, very senior member of the transition team when coordinating foreign policy goals with Russia. That very senior member of the Trump team, we can report tonight, was Jared Kushner. So those are the undisputed facts here at the top of our broadcast. Lies, sanctions, and direction from senior officials who we know often speak for the president. What does it all mean? I'll tell you this. If Bob Mueller's painting a picture, he has been doing his work quietly, methodically. He feels no need, clearly, to fill in the whole picture at once, but there is a picture taking shape. The picture has alleged mercenaries like Paul Manafort and Rick Gates serving foreign powers. It has obscure witnesses like George Papadopoulos. But tonight it also has new characters who are close to the president, a national security official cooperating with the feds and talking about already the marching orders he got from Jared Kushner. Joining me now to dig more into these questions, NBC's chief White House correspondent, Hallie Jackson, Nick Ackerman, a former Watergate special prosecutor, Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney, and Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for the Daily Beast, covering the Russia investigation. I'm going to go to these prosecutors in a moment, but Hallie, starting with you, reporting all this out, how is this bombshell rocking Washington and the White House?
In a big way. I think, is the answer to your question, Ari. This is significant. You cannot understate it. In the past, the White House has been able to come out, stand at that podium at the briefing room, and representatives have been able to, successfully or not, try to distance themselves from whoever was being caught up in this special counsel cloud. The president is not able to distance himself from Mike Flynn. That's just a fact. He picked him to be his national security advisor. He served in the administration. He was a high-ranking member, the innermost of the inner circles for Donald Trump during the beginning part of his administration. And regardless of the questions that we have or that will come, Ari, that is indisputable. The questions of judgment now for President Trump have become indisputable. As for how this is playing inside the West Wing and here on Capitol Hill, there have been a variety of reactions, as you might imagine. Here on the Hill, I spoke with even some Republicans, top Republican senators, for example, who said they are concerned about this. They're acknowledging that. Democrats, of course, say that they are concerned as well, including Mark Warner, who holds that important position on the Senate Intelligence Committee, obviously, that is doing its own investigation in the Russia inquiry. Inside the West Wing, over where I'm doing usually my day job, Ari, there is surprise. This, I think, blindsided folks inside that building, according to our political team's reporting on this. Yes, the White House will say the president was focused on tax reform today. He wanted to get this tax plan done here on Capitol Hill, but you know what he was watching at 10 o'clock this morning? He was getting informed about what was happening with Mike Flynn. We know that. That is what's being confirmed by folks inside the building, and I'll tell you that at least one source close to the president reacted to this with 4 words. Very, very, very bad. And I think that sums it up.
Very bad. And I go to Nick Ackerman on how to put some content and context to those 3 varies, because this is the first time Bob Mueller has breached the White House gates.
That's right. And on top of that, he's also breached the Russian collusion. One element of a false statement charge is that it is material. And even though the false statements that are made were after the campaign and had nothing to do with the campaign, the information that Mike Flynn agreed to states Flynn's false statements and omissions impeded and otherwise had a material impact on the FBI's ongoing investigation into the existence of any links or coordination between individuals associated with the campaign and Russia's efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. So the big question is, what was going on here? What was the prior contact that Flynn had in the campaign that makes his lies material?
Well, let's go to Joyce Vance. Nick Ackerman's doing what prosecutors do. He is going through the statement of the offense. This is one of those nights where we will do a little legal practice live on air, Joyce. But Nick is making the argument, I'd like you to handicap it, that point 2 in the statement of the offense, the impact on the Russia query, does materially pull in the underlying allegations and investigation into campaign collusion. Your view?
I think Nick's interpretation is a legitimate one. No one just lies, right? The lie has content and it has context. And the context here is, what is the lie covering up? So what Nick is saying, and I think it's a reasonable read, is that Flynn's lies were material, that is, they were important in a legal sense, because they were covering something up. And because what they were covering up had to be something within Bob Mueller's investigative jurisdiction as special counsel, which is primarily about the Russia investigation, although it does include a few other things, I think it's logical to conclude that there's a lot more here than Ty Cobb, the president's lawyer, would lead us to believe when he said this didn't reach into the White House or the White House team.
And Betsy Woodruff, on that point again, folks who are sympathetic to the Trump White House often say, who cares if Paul Manafort did money laundering a long time ago? Who cares if George Papadopoulos oversold himself? And again, I think up until tonight, up until December 1st, there was that remaining counter-argument that what if there were just a few, not only bad apples, but what you might call random apples? And who knows them, and who knows what's really going to go down with them? Mike Flynn is not a random apple. He is at the top of the barrel. Speak to the points raised by these prosecutors and Hallie.
What's important to remember here is that up until this morning, there was plausible daylight between the Trump White House and the folks who had been implicated in crimes by Mueller's team. Now there's no more daylight. Additionally, the crime that that Flynn admitted that he committed this morning was a crime that he committed just days after Trump was inaugurated, January 24th, if memory serves. That means that within less than a week of Trump being president, his own national security advisor, a man that he put in an extraordinarily powerful position, had already lied to the FBI in a way that impeded their efforts to figure out how the Russians tried to change or influence the American 2016 presidential elections. That's a pretty extraordinary revelation that type of crime happened, that we now know that that's the case, that it's indisputable. And it speaks to the nature of the people the president surrounds himself with. One thing that any reporter who covers the White House can tell you is that many of the folks in President Trump's inner circle, not all, but many, both inside the White House as well as, and perhaps even more so, outside advisors who talk to the president and talk to reporters on his behalf, lie really frequently. Now, every White House, every campaign has its own fair share of liars, but the liars who surround Donald Trump are sort of unique in that they lie reflexively, they lie regularly, they do it often for petty reasons, and often they do it in ways that are extraordinarily reckless. This is what we've been seeing with some of the biggest legal problems that Mueller has been able to demonstrate of Trump insiders.
I appreciate your clarity and your candor, Betsy, and you're also raising a point about what is going to happen in America in 2017 with a government like this. You refer to the habitual and routine lying by public officials who are paid by taxpayer dollars. There is a view out there that nothing matters, right? Or, what, gosh, everyone can get away with everything. And when it comes to the workings of the federal government, the national security apparatus, Bob Mueller clearly saying today, no, things do matter. You can get in trouble for lying. And Joyce, in Mike Flynn's case, you could get in trouble for lying and a lot more because this is open, right? I mean, the way these cooperating agreements work, the decision on jail time will be made later. Also, Joyce, for your comment, take a listen to Adam Schiff, the top Democratic investigator on these issues today.
It's obviously pretty shocking when the national security advisor of the country is pleading guilty to lying to federal authorities. This is clearly not the last shoe to fall. Here he hasn't disclosed which transition official or officials in the Papadopoulos plea. There was also a lot of information left out. That tells me that there's further investigation of those other individuals going on. And in the case of both Papadopoulos and now Flynn, they are providing real value in terms of information.
Joyce, your response.
There are a lot of people in the Trump White House who won't be sleeping well tonight because they know who they are and they know what interaction they had with Mike Flynn, what he might be able to tell Bob Mueller. One element of this plea agreement that I think it's worth focusing on, and plea agreements are contracts. It's essentially a contract between the government and Mike Flynn, and if he wants the benefit of his bargain, that low sentence recommendation, he has to perform the agreement. And part of that agreement is he has to turn over all evidence that he has to Bob Mueller. So there's no telling what he might have, but obviously Bob Mueller thinks it's important.
And Hallie, briefly, that's a lot of law on the politics and the planning. What is the White House doing next?
Your guess is as good as mine at this point. Listen, that's being a little bit glib about it, but I think that it was significant you did not see the president today.
Anywhere,
you were supposed to see him in the morning, right? There was supposed to be a brief spray in which reporters would have been able to shout questions at him, which puts a lot of pressure now on the weekend and Monday morning, frankly, when it is likely we will at some point see the president. He will at some point have to answer to this. I can tell you that in my conversations with sources today, late this afternoon, there is a sense of wanting to digest some of this, wanting to see how it sort of plays out, at least from a media perspective. But I do think there are some real questions that the president and his team are going to have to be answering to very soon.
Right. And as you say, it is telling to see such uncharacteristic silence from this president. Hallie, Nick, and Betsy, thank you all for your coverage. Joyce, stay with me. I have more to ask you on the law. Coming up, how did the Mueller team handle Flynn at the court proceeding? I'm going to speak to a reporter who was in the courtroom. And what is Flynn giving Mueller? I have new reporting tonight on who else in the Trump world can be feeling the pressure. And later, my special legal breakdown, the Russia timeline, I would argue you need to see because I'm going to show you what Flynn and Trump were saying publicly versus what's been revealed today behind the scenes. I'm Melber, and you're watching a special edition of The Beat on MSNBC.
You're watching